Hi, everybody. Welcome to Pandemic Punditry's panel on putting Pandora back in the box, using emerging technologies to fight pandemics. And we are going to be live via Zoom and hopefully Facebook as well. Karthik and I will take some turns introducing each of our panelists. But before we get started, a couple of administrative things to get out of the way. We are having 3 live polls, so please participate in those. If you have any questions, type them at the bottom of the in Zoom at the bottom in the questions area, and on Facebook Live in the comments section. And Karthik and I would like to thank Hatch for sponsoring this 10-part Pandemic Punditry series. And so before any more delays, Karthika, you want to start by introducing Gagi? Gagi, hi.
Hi, Gagi. Hi. Thank you for joining us today.
Is Gagi there?
I'm sorry, Karthi, what was that?
Is Gagi on?
No, I did not see Dr. Gagi on yet.
Okay, she says she's in, so maybe she's having some difficulty.
Let me see if she is in the if she's in among the attendees.
Yeah, can you just promote her if that's the case?
Yeah, I can. I'll look for her here.
Okay, we'll come back to her introduction in a second.
Okay, I found her.
You found her? Okay, great. So let me just go ahead and introduce Mike then. So Mike is joining us from Berlin in Germany. He's a deep tech advocate and an IoT expert, and he will talk about that. And Mike, if you want to take a few seconds and just let us know what is unique and special about the technologies that Photonic Insights is developing, the company that you're the CEO of, and what is your definition of deep tech, and why do you believe that it is the need of the hour?
Well, thank you so much for welcoming me into this wonderful panel to be with such esteemed guests. So what are we working on? We're working on optical sensing for biomarkers, basically, is how we're approaching the COVID problem, looking for specific biomarkers for attributes related to the factor 6 and 7 coagulation factors. We can get into that a little later, but we're using optical sensing technologies in order to attack that problem. And how I would define deep technology is it involves an element of research, meaning it's not engineering ready. You still have some deep research you need to do. So deep tech is something where you need to develop from a technical readiness level of, let's say, all the way from 0 to concept to 9 to a fully blown product. So the difference between this and software development, also with deep technology, we're working with atoms. And why do I think it's the need of the hour? Because we have to find disruptive technological leaps in order to address the COVID issue. You got to make new things.
Wonderful, spot on. And I love your little thing on your profile on LinkedIn. You know, if you're not working on the pandemic, you should be. You know, I think
absolutely.
So I'm glad you're with us on this panel. Karthika, you want to introduce the next panelist?
Yeah, absolutely, Lavi. Thank you. You want to take us to the next slide? Hi, Mahi. Thank you for joining us. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you.
So Mahi, I mean, you have a pretty impressive sort of list of stuff that you have done, including, you know, being a board member of Nanotech Energy Inc. Can you tell us a little bit about, Lavi, want to pull that question up for me? Yeah. What is conversational AI, and like, how is Amplify's technology different or similar to IBM Watson?
Yeah, so our focus is really helping companies, governments, NGOs communicate more effectively with their constituents or customers. So we use machine learning, natural language processing to automate, essentially have bots be the front line of communication. And what's particularly interesting sort of in the time of COVID-19 is being able to disseminate large amounts of information to populations that are in the billions, and to use that technology to actually get feedback from the public. because it's a two-way problem, right? There's flare spots all over the world, and keeping that sort of digital pulse on a broad base of constituents around the world has proven to be very helpful to these organizations. And how we're different from, let's say, Watson is that, we're very much applied AI. So we have built a training model, an interaction model that works well across standard communications infrastructure like SMS, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, Google Business Messaging. So it's very easy to deploy. It doesn't take millions of dollars to deploy a solution on our platform, and we can start to deliver value very, very quickly in hours.
Great. I think Gagi's on, so let me just, Karthika, if you want to introduce her.
Absolutely.
I
Hi,
was going
Gagi. How are you today? Thank you for joining the panel.
Hi everyone. I hope everyone's staying safe and indoors and all in high spirits. Thank you, Karthika, for having me.
Yeah, so you sort of work in an intersection of service science, text analytics, and AI, and you also wear two hats at IBM, right? You're a director, and you're also IBM Research and CTO for IBM India and South Asia. So how are those roles, complementary, or how are they different?
So I'd like to start by saying that, of course, they build on each other and they're complementary. As the director of research, my primary hat is really to look at longer term technology, so things that will affect and change lives, let's say, in a longer time frame. But I also have the responsibility of creating that vision by meeting the customers and the clients where they are today. Right. So as the CTO for India, South Asia, my primary job is to understand where clients are in their journeys across the industries, the different industries we serve, right? Help them with technology, help them with the vision. And right now, our current vision is to expedite every client's digital transformation to cloud and with AI, right? And then I also wear my research hat to make sure that, 3 years down the line or when the next pandemic hits, they are not out of business. So that's really how the two hats go together.
Wonderful. It's perfect.
Fantastic.
And I know you came out of a intensive session within IBM on how to work with this pandemic, and I'm sure we'll share those insights post this introduction. So looking forward to hearing from you on that, Gagi. So let's now introduce Claes. Claes is joining us from Sweden, where he's also in quarantine like the rest of us. Claes here is the interesting part about your background, Claes, is that I understood that you're actually a registered nurse. So,
yeah, I am. That's a long time ago, but yes, I am.
and that you also went to UPenn to do some advanced radiology training as well. So yeah. I know that you've worn many hats. I think, I knew you when you were the head of Cambio in Sri Lanka, where you spent 18 years in multiple roles within Cambio software. Well known for the health tech they've developed, especially NHS, I think, uses it. And of course, you now hold a variety of different positions, chairman of the board of many companies. The question I had for you, was, what do you believe the greatest challenge that's posed by the health? You've developed all these healthcare systems, especially the 20 years of the e-health systems. What is the biggest challenge that you're seeing from this pandemic on those things, and how do we as technologists and entrepreneurs meet that challenge?
Oh, well, I'd say there are two areas that you should be covered in that question, and that is the clinical side of healthcare and also the scientific side of healthcare, because both clinical doctors and scientists benefit from structured, well-defined data. So the challenge is to be able to collect patient data before, during, and under an outbreak like this. It would be helpful to firstly avoid the illness, but also give the right treatment, and then learn from the pandemic through data mining. So after all, this is not the last pandemic we will see. So the short answer, what an entrepreneur can do is probably develop tools to collect and to visualize structured data before, during, and after a pandemic.
And Klaas, I think you and our next panelist also have developed some medical devices, and you're going to share some of that story today. You're currently the CEO of Ray Intelligence, and there's a radar device that you're using for remote patient monitoring. So we can talk about that next. But I think there's also a poll now. Please go ahead and answer that poll if you're a member of the audience. The next person I would like to introduce is Vikram. Vikram has a lot of experience, and he's, as the former CEO of Steth.io and now advisor, has developed a very interesting medical device. He will share some of those insights. He again has had numerous leadership positions and has 20 journal articles and holds over a dozen US and international patents for his work. So welcome, Vikram. The question that we have for you, I think I've frozen up my screen there we go. So as the director of R&D at Verathon, where you made against medical devices, you were a key person in that effort, and Steth.io. What is, in your opinion, is the single biggest challenge in getting life-saving medical devices to market? And do you see that impediment diminishing or increasing post this pandemic?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Lavi, and it's great to be on this panel. So yeah, I've been in and around the medical device industry in the U.S. For a long time. I also I have a degree in biomedical engineering. So that kind of the interesting thing I was thinking about this question a little bit before, and one of the obvious answers might be regulatory approval, but that is not the obvious answer that I'm going to pick, because yes, regulatory approvals do get in the way. FDA approval, 510K, that has some that does create a barrier for many medical devices, but I don't feel like it's an unnecessary barrier. It's a requisite barrier, because you don't want a device that has not been proven and the efficacy is not established. So I feel like the biggest barrier I've seen in the several medical devices that I've been part of is actually the payment and getting insurance, or in the US Medicare, to pay for use of a medical device. And that has been the biggest barrier. So at Verathon, there was a very nice payment structure established for using this bladder scan device, and therefore it just took off the market. At Steth.io, we struggled to get payment established, and we really struggled to get doctors to adopt it. But this has changed in the last 2 months.
Yes.
So telemedicine has now fast-tracked on the payment as well as on the FDA approval. So both of those things have been fast-tracked, and now those technologies are being adopted very quickly.
Wonderful. So what we want to do a little bit, Karthik and I, was just to set a little bit of a sort of a baseline, and also situate sort of the expertise of the various participants of this call within that framework, and then we'll open it out for sort of questions that we have for each of the panelists, as well as questions that you're going to have for each other, I'm sure, as well. So everybody is very well aware of this pandemic life cycle that we're all living in right now. So if you're symptomatic or asymptomatic, get tested, you find out whether you're positive or negative. The government will put you on quarantine, or you put yourself on self-isolation. We have this brand new word in our vocabulary called contact tracing. So that is a vital part of the process. We'll talk about that in a bit. Then if your symptoms get worse, you end up being hospitalized, where other interventions take place, and hopefully you're cured or you recover, and you don't pass away like so many thousands have done already. Of course, all of this whole life cycle gets interrupted if a vaccine comes into the scene, and or if you find a cure, where obviously the impact is far less in terms of the terminal aspect of this whole life cycle. The other side, Karthika, you want to take a little stab at this, is sort of the stakeholders.
Yeah. For sure, I'll take a stab at it. So the key thing that I want to get everybody to focus on here is number 4, which is the frontline workers. So the essential services workers, for example, the sanitation workers, the people who clean the roads, the essential goods delivery people, they're all considered now as frontline workers, right? So as we very rightly said at the top, new heroes for a new villain, right? Who were not considered frontline workers prior to this pandemic. And then there are the obvious ones, which are obviously like healthcare providers, the military, government officials to ensure that, the state mechanism keeps running, the general population, staying indoors, going outdoors, the privilege of social distancing, etc. And of course, the scientists and the researchers who are actually working on solutions, on a cure. And so those are really the key sort of stakeholders of this pandemic situation.
Great. And then we sort of said, okay, let's sort of, as far as we know, and we're not the experts, we have the experts on the panel, essentially sort of outlined what the whole landscape today is of all the pandemic technology that exists. And of course, we have to talk about the possibility of, the new technology that we have to create to solve some of the problems. So, these are pretty obvious again. The diagnostics, and we hear about rapid testing, antibody testing, gene testing, saliva tests, quick, so we have all of these sort of tests that people are working on. There's contact tracing. Apple and Google sort of come up with something. Individual countries have come up with some apps, and we'll share some of those because there are some people on this panel who were privy to or were involved in that. Then of course this whole idea of self-isolation. So there are cameras, drones, geofence wristbands, like in Hong Kong, where they can keep tabs of whether you're actually self-isolating or staying in quarantine. Then the self-care, we have Vikram's technology, telemedicine. We've got classes, eSense, radar technology, and the Set.io. So there's all part of the whole self-care world. And then Gagi will talk a lot about the therapeutics, the research that is going on there. And then Mahi's chatbots that are doing crisis communication, and especially he will talk about what they've done in India, so that billions of people can have access to information. So very excited about sort of but I wanted to make sure that we understand in this whole vast universe of technology for this pandemic where our panelists sort of sit. And if they don't agree with that, let me know. But we thought maybe we set the ground here, and then dive into sort of what's going on. Karthika, you want to talk about the hype cycle a little bit?
Yeah, okay. So I was very keen on this hype cycle when Lavi and I were doing some research on this. And part of the reason for that is, I guess I was wondering, and this is kind of an open question to the panel, now because of the pandemic, is this kind of hype cycle going to flatten? Is the curve going to flatten? Are we going to get to the plateau of productivity faster?
Right, and that, this applies to the Gartner hype cycle for emerging technologies or artificial intelligence. So let's ask the panel. I think it'd be a good question to us. If anybody anybody who wants to come in, and are we going to see a flattening of these hype cycles? Are these technologies going to mature much quicker than they have in the past?
Yes, we're going to see a flattening, and we're also going to see entities completely dropping off the chart as well when they fail to demonstrate utility. So we're going to see both.
Okay.
I think the panel, the hype cycle represents kind of almost a human behavior, how you get excited about certain things and then they show up in the trough of disillusionment. So while I don't think that the hype cycle gets flatter, it gets quicker, so it gets shorter. The cycle time gets shorter.
Okay, that's an astute observation. Yeah, I can see that happen.
Gagi, can we get Gagi to chime in on this, please?
I completely agree. I think we're going to see the cycle get shorter and the plateau of productivity for the key things to be reached much faster. Why? Because there were many people who were thinking about a transformation journey, about digitalizing their businesses. They just have to get there faster, and that's the reality, right? So a lot of that will be technology push and technology pushing the transformation. So I absolutely think that the cycle is going to get shorter.
Wonderful. So, I think Gagi, if you want to stay on, I think one of the things that I found quite fascinating in sort of researching all the things that IBM is doing here. I mean, it was really it's fascinating. I mean, maybe you can walk us a little bit through this slide and the one to follow, because this is obviously your area.
Sure, happy to. I think IBM jumped in right at the at when the pandemic was starting, and it's really taken an approach that I would say of 3 buckets. Okay, and I might not go over each of them, but I'll give you a flavor. The first one, is helping researchers and scientists get to their productive best, right? So increasing productivity. And this is an initiative that was triggered by the White House Office of Science and Technology and the US Department of Energy, IBM, coming together in a consortium with the others like Google, Microsoft, and really offering out their compute, right? Their high performance compute for research, either for drug discovery, molecular biology, deep learning, and machine learning. So today, as we speak, we have 41 active projects using 41K GPUs on 429 petaflops, about 40 consortium members. So it's a huge opportunity for scientists who needed that raw compute power to be able to run their experiments, to just put in a proposal and get access to this, right? So just general availability of this compute just helps research. On the discovery, on accelerating discovery phase, there's also this sheer need to get access to trusted information. There's so much going on, right? People saying so many things, what are the drugs, what are the right antibiotics, what should I do, what shouldn't I do? So we launched it almost, very quickly, almost overnight, we launched the deep search service that indexed, peer-reviewed papers, licensed databases, to actually curate all COVID-19 critical knowledge. Who does it help? It helps scientists, of course, and then at some point you could even tapering it off and see users and citizens use that. So on the same thread,
And I noticed something. I think here in India we get asked this question a lot, which is hey, are they doing anything with medicinal plants and herbs and things like that? Is it just all sort of allopathic sort of medicine? And I happen to come across this where again HPC being used study of medicinal plants. I thought it was quite fascinating that that there are all these interesting projects going on, and from a lay perspective, it seems, Gagi, that when I looked at that, I said, wow, I'm glad that all of this is happening, right? Because you always wonder, sitting here at home, are the scientists using all of this technology, and are the companies collaborating, or are they just competing with each other? And it's so nice to see that you obviously have this collaboration across all of the major tech players: Amazon, Google, Microsoft, IBM. Yeah, I think that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing to say is that I've seen in this pandemic overnight, collaborations being formed across the government, the enterprises, the universities, the top scientists, the top minds really getting together and saying, okay, this is really the most important thing to solve. So I think that's really heartening to see. So I talked about the compute, I talked about deep search powered by AI. I think overnight we released the Watson Assistant. That's really for citizens. It's an AI-powered conversational assistant. It's active about in 25 countries now. That lets citizens use it, and it's free, right? So for 90 days, we've been offering it free. So that's really the 2 levers of promoting discovery and access to trusted information. And the third one really is about helping businesses cope with all the changes, right? IBM, of course, has all the Fortune 100 companies, a major part of them as its clients, and all of them are going through their ebbs and tides, right? Depending on what sector, what industry you are in. If you're in retail, then certain things are down in the slums, certain things like groceries are high soaring, but the supply chain, right? Everywhere, I think the problem of a resilient and agile supply chain that can accurately forecast demands and peaks, very critical, right? So IBM has solutions for its clients and how to make the supply chain more resilient, more agile, and it has some solutions in that respect.
Wonderful. So
yeah, I think I'll pause there and see.
No worries. We'll get back to you. So we wanted to sort of maybe get everybody's opinion on. I mean, this is something that is in the minds of a lot of people. Is sort of upfront. Is a lot about these contact tracing applications and sort of applications that are out there by various governments on making sure that we are compliant with us self isolation, quarantine, lockdowns, whatsoever. So this is India's app. And actually, this is from my actual app of our Arogya Setu. So this is in India. We are supposed to have this app downloaded, and if you're a delivery person or an employee, you can actually enter a building without having this up there. So this allows people to be effectively traced if somebody is developing COVID, right? So it tells you within 500 meters. It tells me, for example, whether there's any COVID patients around me. I know there's one within 1 kilometer of me, but not 500 meters of me, for example, right? So this is one. Then we have, Singapore did Trace Together. I like the way they put the word, by the way, trace together. It's not the government tracing you, but you're also in the process of tracing you. So I like the way they name that. So Trace Together is what Singapore is doing. And then Mike, I think you have a little bit of privacy into what Thailand was doing, and it is a little different from what you've heard. And I think maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Actually, this is a little different than the one solution that I shared with you from True Digital Contact Tracing. This looks more similar to an offering from a company called Uberall in Germany, where they're able to take social media information and also combine that with aggregating. They're using the power of Google Maps. This is what this looks like. And so this solution here doesn't have real time, but it's able to aggregate and show who's visiting which areas, which stores, and a predictor of density. Because as we know, when you're in indoor locations, and specifically with the solution in Thailand, for a large amount of the year, due to the climate, you are indoors and in air-conditioned areas. So it's important to know in advance how crowded a location will be. And that's what I see about this. So you're getting geo-analytic insights to know how crowded a location is going to be, and then you as an individual are better able to assess the risk and make a judgment: do I go to that location or not?
Okay, and the Thailand one.
Sorry, is that just for individuals though, Mike, or is it also for governments? Because my understanding of it is with apps like Arogya and stuff, it needs to reach some sort of a critical mass, right? But with something like this, it doesn't.
Well, I mean, you can do this without a government being involved, and so then the critical mass function is going to be a function of marketing, right? So that's one of the unique attributes of this solution, is that you could deploy it without explicit permission of the government or involvement, and then generate critical mass and hopefully get the government to follow along with you.
Right. Okay.
And that was
the answer to the question.
The mobile one that you were talking about, right, Mike? The potential mobile solution, you said, because the mobile towers keep track of where people are as opposed to.
Right, and so that solution is just when you start involving telcos directly and telco towers, then because that is, frequency bandwidth is allocated by governments, you have a government component involved. Okay. So that other solution requires, a government, even that one solution that doesn't explicitly identify individuals. It is more identifies density and concentrations of people near towers, and then with a machine learning layer on top of that, able to extrapolate information. You still are getting tower data, and that requires some type of approval.
Okay, understood.
Okay. So in a world, if you had some privacy concerns, that seems to be because it is sort of anonymous, because it's. I mean, I'm sure everything can be tracked down, but it is sort of anonymized by design that way. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's anonymized by design. You're not real time getting, like, let's say you don't have real time UUIDs of the people that are within the tower, right? It's a different level of abstraction for identifying a person based on strength of radio signals, but not bound to an individual ID. So you can aggregate this and determine that you have a certain density of people, and quite accurate, because as you know, we're able to time the signals from the tower, so we're able to get an approximate geolocation of where people are.
Okay, wonderful.
But it's not bound to their MAC, to the MAC address of their mobile device or bound to their subscriber ID.
Oh, okay. So great. I think
I just thought I could add, another level of abstraction here, right? So you have the governments, of course, telling us to install contact tracing apps. You could work it through telcos where you have one level of abstraction. The other could be, the most non-intrusive way could be satellite imagery, right? Satellite imagery married with trusted data sources. So let's say, from the trusted data sources, there are red zones and green zones, and you could detect, if the red zones are really following the right principles of social distancing, or are there crowds getting together? That is the farthest level of abstraction, where you really don't tap into any personal information. But you today, on things like the weather platform or weather apps, you already get all these satellite imagery. And then marrying that with trusted government information, it's a further use case from contact tracing, but it could help you monitor at least your red zones and your green zones and monitor best practices and social distancing. And so the IBM Weather app, I think, is trying to build a solution. It's already available today, so it's available for India as well. It's available for the US, where you could actually track your regions, your COVID statistics, but also on top of that, marry some of these details that I talked about. I still don't have it superimposed with the satellite imagery, the weather, and the COVID statistics, but I'm saying that's a vision that you could go, and it's completely non-intrusive.
It's a great point. I think, in the rush for this pandemic, obviously we've put together a lot of different ways to sort of contact trace effectively.
Yeah.
And I think, for the next pandemic, I think we need to come up with a better system that takes into account some of these concerns around privacy. And also, it has to be effective and scalable, right? So I think there's definitely opportunity for companies and businesses and startups and everybody else to sort of explore this in its complete diversity. And there's so many different options you can use to do that. I remember you all know Harari saying this on BBC the other day. He said technology is not deterministic, right? So the dictators also have to use the same technology that democracies use, right? So the technology is not the problem, it's the people that use it, right? So the structures, the legal frameworks, the protections need to come from people and politicians and governments and institutions. The technology is the technology. You can use it any which way you want, right? And that's the beauty of technology, and that's why we have the panel today, is essentially to understand what is possible.
So
just a couple of just a couple of things for the audience. I think a few people were trying to raise their hands, but just keep typing in the questions in the question box, and we'll take questions throughout the session.
Vikram?
I just wanted to add, I wanted to add one last thing, because we were mentioning satellite imagery. So what's really interesting about your mention of satellite imagery is that we're talking about industries taking off. This adds another use case for nanosats, for smaller nation states that don't necessarily have a space program that may want to control this information because that's what their citizens demand. So I really like the addition of adding space-based imagery for a higher level of abstraction to identify zones, and this could smaller nations could do this by using nanosats.
Yeah, wonderful idea. Vikram?
Yeah, the two technologies that I'm really excited about on this contact tracing are so the thing that Apple and Google are doing. What is really interesting about that is it's an OS level upgrade. So you're not having to install an app. It's built into the OS. You will have to accept that there's some data being collected, but I think that's going to be a better uptake than because even in Singapore, where the uptake was only about 30 to 40% of the people, which is a small country. In India or in the US, I mean, that uptake is going to be really important. So the OS level update that's applied, that automatically this contact tracing gets installed. That's a very important thing in my view. The other technology that is similar to what Gargi was just talking about from the satellite imagery perspective. There are people working on sewage analysis. So taking samples from sewer systems to analyze if there's, because apparently it's a 2-week advance window that you get remnants of the virus in sewage before the symptoms even show up. So you can automatically, by sewage testing, you can determine red zones, green zones, yellow zones almost 2 weeks in advance.
Wow.
So there's some couple of really interesting.
Yes, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on where these are concerned. I think that is quite interesting as well. I have read about that you have that virus is you have advanced notice about that, and somebody said even sleep patterns are sometimes if you analyze them in depth, you can get a sense of impending sort of infections. So Vikram, while you're on there, if you could quickly sort of walk us through Steth.io a little bit and what is this device? I mean, just to make, why I sort of found this, if we are, in this pandemic, one of the things that is really in short supply are doctors, nurses, and healthcare professionals, because they're in the front line. That does not mean that in addition to COVID, people are not getting sick, right? There are people who are sick. They got, colds, coughs, other illnesses that is not COVID, they're cancers, whatever. So this kind of self-care at home thing, I mean, you have blood pressure monitors, you have diabetes, sugar monitors, you got, weight, you can do a lot of these things. But the one thing that in telemedicine, the doctors cannot get at you is they can't listen to your heart or your chest. You need a stethoscope, and a trained person has to put that stethoscope on your chest to listen to it. And you've solved that problem with Steth.io. So maybe you can tell the panel as well as the audience listening what exactly this does.
So there's 2 variations of this. Is a stethoscope, a new generation of digital stethoscope. And there's 2 variations of it. One of them is built into the case of your phone, and that is more intended for the one that's showing clinician use. So the clinician can apply it on a patient, and they can listen to the patient's heart as well as the lung sounds. And then there is AI built in there, which analyzes and gives you an indication whether the sound is normal or if you have some issues going on. So I used to call it the Shazam of heart sounds. If you've ever used the Shazam app, it'll actually give you an automatic recognition of the sounds. So that's for the heart. And now suddenly for COVID, so the telehealth piece, the one on the top, is the patient device, and this has come about in the last 2 months. So the team has really acted in together and come up with a device that they can give to the patient, that doctors can give to the patient, especially if they're suspected of COVID symptoms. And the patient can have it at home, and the doctors can remotely listen to the patient's lung sounds. So that device, it talks via Bluetooth to your mobile phone, and then to the cloud, the doctor can listen to it in a telemedicine session. And especially right now, so now you're quarantined, if you don't have extreme symptoms, you're quarantined, you don't want to go to the hospital. So the doctor can still examine you with this device, but you're sitting remotely, and it's integrated with telemedicine apps.
Great.
So
I have a question. Sorry, I have a question for Vikram actually. Have you seen the adoption of this technology go up at all in the past few weeks?
Absolutely, it's taken off through the roof. Yes.
Great.
So lots of doctors are ordering this for the patients. So right now we're FDA approved for the US, and we're getting the approval in EU as well. And it's just taken off in conjunction with telemedicine visits.
So this is a question for the whole panel. So are we actually in the future looking at somewhere where, your vitals that you normally go to the doctor, I mean, your heart, lung sounds, your blood pressure, blood sugar if you're a diabetic, your weight, all of these things are in some kind of an IoT device, right, that is at home. You either a Fitbit, a wearable, right? I don't know, something that you always have on. This stuff gets sort of, put up into a cloud. There's clinical decision support happening with AI, who's looking at all these parameters and say, hey, I think you're going to come in for a cold, or I think you need nutrition, you take vitamins, whatever. And it takes care of some of these things that we normally burden doctors with, right? The run-of-the-mill sort of problems. And in a pandemic, that becomes kind of critical because, you know, the last things, you know, you want all the medical staff working on anything, right? Is this sort of the future, that there's a lot of technology you can build in, a lot of AI that looks at parameters across the globe, looks at local situations, makes changes, you know, even do things like write prescriptions? I mean, is this the future? Because it's all medically sanctioned protocols and things like that built within AI. I mean, can we have like a global or a regional doctor kind of thing going on? I mean, is that something that we probably should aim for? Or, I mean,
I know there are people working on that future, and I think it's important to remember that like AI is not going to solve everything for us. So there will be a doctor in the loop for a long time.
Yes.
And therefore, like, yes, while you may be able to do self-care and self-determination of your vitals and some key things, when you get sick, the doctor has to look at those metrics and make a determination. What will be interesting is kind of getting all this data into one place that is integrated with some electronic medical records, so that that's visible.
So
can we get Mahi to chime in on
I'm
this
just
also,
about to go
please?
there. Yeah, I'm going to go there. So Mahi, please, you want to take a stab at what you've done for India here, from all the way from California? I think I've seen this as well on my phone, on my app.
Yeah, so you know, the opportunity to work with the government of India was really around getting information out to the masses, and then using interesting technology to achieve that. So we've deployed a very broad solution there that starts with web-based just chat using NLP. And knowledge base that we built based on information from the Ministry of Health. But we've also built you know, two important partnerships with both Facebook and Google. Facebook getting access to some special APIs that allows us to do pre-broadcasts and subscribers, so that a citizen can basically subscribe to information and they get timely updates to their phone based on where they live and kind of their preference profile. And then with Google, we unlocked a new feature that's in both Google Search and Google Maps that allows you to do location-sensitive search. But then the entity you search for, so for example, if you look for food and shelter locations in Delhi, it will point you towards these food and shelter stations, and you can message that station. And of course, it's automatic. You're not talking to a human being, but you're getting real-time information about what's going on in that shelter, you know, what food's available, how many spots might be available, or it's full, you should be looking at somewhere else. And to do this, not just in a text-based experience, but one that's really rich media. So pictures, graphics, video, you know, things that, and it doesn't require you to download an app into the device. So this is reaching, you know, a very broad audience. We're doing this in a multilingual way so that it's, the information can be consumed with lay people, you know, that are across the country. And then working with state and local governments and NGOs to refine this information, because, you know, things that are happening in UP are very different than things that are happening in Karnataka. So really localizing that information and making it more relevant. So that's, you know, that's getting lots and lots of uses. About 40,000 people an hour access these services. So it's operating.
Mahi, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We've just got Avinash asking a question. Avinash, thanks for joining us. Can we not integrate the medical history and advice with Arogya Setu? Let's have medical delivery and medical support on Arogya Setu, and whether that's possible is his question.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about this is we're starting to see the first level of integration and adoption, and this is really mostly about information dissemination, but it's also about trying to get some feedback from the community. I think To the question here, can it be further personalized, being relevant to your medical history? There are some privacy issues around that, and people need to opt in and be comfortable about that. But we absolutely believe that the future will be much more personalized. It doesn't have to be sort of a generic bits of information. It can be very hyper relevant to the individual, their community, and their concern or their situation.
Okay. Can we have class kind of answer one of the questions from Sumesh Sharma? Thanks for joining us today. What role you envisage for world militaries in future, in terms of like what is the role that they would play?
Sorry, I couldn't hear that
pandemic.
question. Could you say it again?
Yeah, sorry. What role do you think what role do you envisage for militaries in future in terms of helping governments to tackle these pandemics using their technical and medical expertise and also software?
Okay. Medically definitely, because you can always use their they have unused powers that they don't use in peace times, so to speak. So you can always use the medical equipment and the competence that they have, of course, and also technology maybe also, but not so much.
So class, this technology that you built as part of Ray Intelligence, it's a radar device, right? So give us a little idea of how this is being deployed, because it's an interesting sort of technology also in its own right.
Yeah, it is. Sorry, I can't show you the product, but since I'm in quarantine, but it's like a white box, much like a smoke alarm that you have in the ceiling of your home. It's not bigger than that. It's like, and it has a radar sensor in it that can measure presence, aliveness, and in near future also vital signs like breathing, pulse, and heart rate. Also common features are changes in moving patterns and sleeping quality. We're working on that. All this is non-intrusive, of course, because we don't use any pictures. It's pure signals that is sent to the cloud service. So basically, any deviation from a person's normal appearance on the radar can be sent as an alarm to the care provider, so they can act on it. For example, if a person falls out of bed or stopped breathing or been out of the room for longer than normal, it's implemented also some machine learning. So the radar learns how a certain person acts. So you can, in the longer term, you can see changes also.
So thanks, class. I believe we have one of the audience members who's raised his hand. Sanjeev, go ahead. You can speak now. Do you have a question for the panel? Sanjeev? Okay, let's move on.
Okay, just a broad question for the panel here. So how do you see this future evolving? I mean, what are some of the impediments or barriers? So I mean, you have competing different technologies, platforms. I come from a middleware background where integration is the king. So how do we get all of these to work together? You have nation states doing different things with different standards. I mean, we seem to not have been able to get a electric plug that is standard across the world. How do we work to get all of these to talk about? Because I think pandemic has really shown that actually we are just all of humanity as opposed to sort of individual nation states. So we're acting like that, but we're all broadly impacted sort of the same way. So how do you make sure that there's no duplication of efforts and we were pooling all these resources? I mean, IBM's done a wonderful job of opening up all of this stuff, compute power to the whole world. I mean, is that sort of the way forward? I mean, how do we make sure that this technology all doesn't get sort of built in silos and none of them talk to each other at the end of the day, and then we don't get the economies of scale or the efficiencies that come with scale? Anybody?
We need to follow open standards. Right. Look at the enormous adoption of RESTful architecture. Right. We just need to follow what the tech industry does so well, and that is pushing open standards and utilizing them.
Yeah, I think open and being secure, having the underpinnings of technology so that you build once and you run anywhere is key, right? And of course, IBM now partners with Red Hat, big proponent of OpenShift, where, you can build all the applications, everything that you talked about, remote patient monitoring, telemedicine, all built once, but can run today on Amazon Cloud. The week after, if you want to move to Azure, that's fine too, or you want to run it on public. I'd want to have, as a consumer, I want to have the choice of knowing where to run and the flexibility to run it. That's where I see technology going.
Recently in the UK, there was some criticism that they're sort of using their data in a central model as opposed to kind of in a distributed environment, making it more vulnerable, right? What does the panel think about that? Do you guys have any ideas of how the data should be distributed or stored, rather?
I think it really depends on the application. Sometimes centralizing data, like in our world, we're all about data sets and how do you get really scaled data, because you need signals that are in the billions to really build a machine learning model that is really effective at being useful. So that kind of data has to be centralized for data correlation and for sort of building the neural map of data. But there's lots of localized information, like how do you make that, how do you translate that learning into different languages, for example, which can be highly distributed. So I think it really depends on the problem and how you structure data in terms of leveraging it to drive a solution.
Karthika, do we have answers to the polls? I mean, do you want to put that
Yeah,
up?
we do.
We have, cognizant of the time as well. And I know that two panelists have a hard deadline.
Yeah. So poll 1, do you believe that companies and organizations globally will fast track their adoption of emerging tech like AI, IoT due to this pandemic? 95% agree with our panelists. They've said yes, they do. And the second poll, are you concerned that contact tracing apps will infringe on your rights to privacy? 64% have answered yes. So is there anyone who wants to chime in on that?
I think the concern around privacy is there, right? For sure. I mean, that's something that we all have to grapple with. I mean, the technology is there. I think that's probably the politicians and the lawyers, and hopefully we have a panel next week on Friday that talks about syndromic surveillance, and we have an eminent panel of 5 lawyers who are going to dig into that very question. So stay tuned in for that one. And what was the last poll that we took, Karthika?
We're still running that, Larry. Yeah.
Okay, so what I wanted to do was, quickly sort of, and that's the poll, please chime in on that poll, is to sort of, when I sort of did some research, I found a lot of people that had done, are doing amazing things. So I just want to flash those quickly. So there's a Danish startup. You guys can read this, right? So there are about 10 companies that we picked that seem to be doing a lot of interesting stuff on the detection side.
Lavi, just 1 second, sorry to interrupt. We have a Mohan Ramanujam who has a question for the panel. Go ahead, Mohan, you can talk now.
Yeah, hi, thanks. I just wanted to follow up or ask, I guess, a follow-up on a question that was asked about open standards and how do we distribute information. I think, in terms of what, I think Gargi is in terms of IBM's kind of a network of, which is used for, research purposes where people are providing compute platform, you can actually have information, sort of data warehouses, right? I mean, where people can actually put in, whatever they want to put in, whatever information they gather in an open format. I mean, that you can access using, as one person said, RESTful APIs. But there's also an interesting technology that I ran across coming from a messaging background myself, as Lavi as well is from, there's actually a company in Los Angeles called Cynadia, which actually is pushing a technology called publish and subscribe to the edge of the cloud. So the idea is, push compute and warehousing to the edge of the cloud, and sort of, it's like a radio model, right? You publish on a
Sorry, Mohan, is there a question? Sorry, could you get your question, please? I'm just cognizant of
it's not so much a question, actually. It was more of a comment on open standards and mechanisms to push data out. So it's not really a question, but just a follow-up to that point that was raised. Okay,
thanks, Mohan. Thank you.
So I think we have 2 minutes. So I just wanted to, 2-3 minutes, I just wanted to, Karthika, if there's one more question, we can take one from the audience on the questions that they've typed in.
Yes, I believe Mike actually had answered, and I'm quite interested to understand, going back to the world militaries and their role. He had said supply chain and logistical support from the military. Do you want to maybe, Mike, elaborate on that a little bit for the sake of our audience, because I think this was a private chat between.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're looking at what militaries can provide. An essential function of the military in order to for force protection or to deliver the hammer where it needs to go, to put it another way, is to have extremely robust logistical systems and supply chains. So instead of delivering munitions to the front line, we could use this military's capability to deliver what is needed to patients or to individuals. And this could be a way world militaries could be use their capabilities without emphasizing the war fighting aspect. Right? Because if we're going to see soldiers on the streets, it's going to make a lot of people uncomfortable. But if people understand that the mission of these militaries, they're not here to deliver force or project force. They are there to use their inherently strong supply chain and logistical capabilities.
Okay. So I think we are right on time. I know Vikram, you have to leave as well as Mahi. Gagi, do you have to leave as well? Should we? Yeah, so I think we have a hard stop. So what we're going to do is we're gonna stop the panel here. Any of these questions?
Just gonna do the final poll, Lavi. How comfortable is the audience? Just from the audience, how comfortable are you about relinquish some of your individual rights and privacy concerns if syndromic surveillance technologies can help you and your loved ones stay safe? 13% answered extremely comfortable. 38% said comfortable. 28 somewhat, and 21 uncomfortable, which probably, Lavi, we're exploring in the next panel.
Yeah, so I think we got sort of a 50-50 split between sort of comfortable and not so comfortable, right? It seems like, if I did my math right in my head. So that's an interesting part. So the next one is on the 15th. It's on syndromic surveillance, as I said, new frontier in privacy rights. So we have 5 eminent lawyers going to talk about this. It should be an interesting debate more than anything else, I think. So we have people from the General Counsel, from Hershey Corporation. We have former GC of Tata Steel. So we got a pretty interesting panel of people from across the world, US as well as India and Sri Lanka. So that should be an interesting panel. So I just want to thank our panelists. I think you guys are insanely busy. It's funny that, and I've talked to some of you before this panel, it's hard to actually put a panel together like this because the number of people seem busier than normal. I think that's because the technologists are working as hard as the scientists, I think, and researchers in trying to find solutions. And I think, the future is technology. I think today you can't really do drug research without lots of technology, as we've seen from the IBM example. You can't really do communications without it. You can't do contact tracing without it. And you certainly need all these fancy new devices. And I think the fact that we were able to sort of put devices together in a matter of weeks, ventilators, all kinds of things in a matter of weeks, I think talks about another sort of, if you get smart engineers and give them a problem, they can usually figure it out. And that's amazing. So I think technologists are coming to the fore. I think all of you talked about using some amount of AI and machine learning and big data and analytics in all of your solutions. And it's, I think, sort of revealing that it is actually a lot more spread. I mean, we want it to be obviously adopted by a lot more companies out there and a lot more organizations out there, but it's there. I mean, it's being used. And as we say, we may not see a complete flattening of these hype cycles, but we'll see these hype cycles sort of contracting and making things work faster. And that's exactly what we need. So thank you very much for being a part of our panel today. And if there are any questions from the audience that are directed individually, we'll try and funnel those to you. And you're not responsible to answer them, but you have the time, please do, and we'll funnel it back to them. So thank you very much to our audience who joined us today on Facebook Live and Zoom. And thank you again for being a part of this fabulous panel. And thank you, Hatch.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hatch.
Take care. Bye-bye.